And I'm so inspired by this. So thank you for the book recommendations. I would like to say, just before we move into Meghan in the final session, when I started Voice Ed Radio 4 years ago next month, this is the type of conversation that I dreamed of. I went to bed dreaming of. So I would love to be in touch with all of you to kind of bring this to our listening audience in a big way. It's just incredible. This is the type of conversation. I really believe that if we want to change education, we have to change the way we talk about education. And that's what you're doing here this afternoon. So thank you for that. And I found the title of this next session rather curious when I first read it, because I figured that a child-friendly home, I thought I'd just take that for granted. I know there are homes that are not as friendly as possible, but I just thought it was a given that in the community, that would be the place where that would be the friendliest. So I'm happy to welcome Meghan Wills, who is going to moderate this session and take us into this exploration of the child-friendly home. My two children have just arrived home from school. And so I will, if you see them on the screen, that's who they are, not intruders, just children. So Meghan, over to you. Thank you.
So I've been working with Richard through Uniting for Children and Youth. And he reached out to me about today, specifically because a lot of the work that I do in my home and I do in our communities is centered in wellness, emotional well-being, and specifically through mindfulness. So this is why I'm here today. I'm a mindfulness coach. I work with mostly the Black communities, but other communities as well, around prioritizing and recentering ourselves in our emotional well-being and using the power of the famous words of Marcus Garvey: emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. And what that means is we are our own saviors and we can also be our own worst enemies, and using mindfulness as our powerhouse to support ourselves in our authenticity and to free ourselves, because when we free ourselves, we free everybody around us. So that is a little bit about me. And I know, Richard, you wanted to share the video from Akilah. Did you want to do that right away? So we'll start with a short video by Akilah Richards. She wrote this incredible book. I don't know if you can see my screen, that you'll see my little notes in it here, that I just wanted to quickly share a couple of points that really stood out to me that are relevant to where we're at now in terms of the pandemic and the life skills that we're not necessarily getting in the school system as it is right now. And I think that will segue well into her talk that she has, and just talking about those highlights in there. So let me just start here. So, talking about the pandemic. What families are facing now as I write this introduction is not a crisis founded in lack of going to a classroom. No, friend, it's evidence of another pandemic, one where severely underdeveloped social and emotional skills are overshadowed by the performance, competition, and one-upping that schools teach us to value. Much of the stress in homes in my current time ain't got shit to do with learning, excuse my language, that's what she says. It's about adults and children being together all day with no tools for being around each other comfortably for more than a few moments at a time. Tools like healthy conflict and stress management, and having to face the open wounds of certain personal challenges instead of hiding from them. A working mother's dictator-type parenting style suddenly collides with a stay-at-home dad's more relaxed approach to his children. Suddenly, this is a thing they're having to face 7 days a week instead of just on weekends with wine or whatever else. Instead of performing the versions of ourselves that a young leader usually shows their parents, they dole out the pushback that's usually reserved for their classroom teachers or the younger kids in their school. Since their parents don't know the issues their child is facing, they label it as a crisis schooling situation, resolvable only by school at home situations where teachers can come get their kids from the frazzled parents. These are not education issues. They are relationship and community issues. They are a matter of missing life skills that our schools are not designed to support our children in developing, but that we still end up needing. We need that missing skills reality, especially when we are called to show up without our vices and our voluntary social distancing from our homes. When your normal patterns shift unexpectedly, what are the things you remember unlearning about yourself? So I will leave it there. And if you want to kick that video off, Richard, that'd be amazing.
Peace. It is such a pleasure to be able to participate in something as important as this with you. Thank you, Richard, for the invitation, and thank you for those of you who are here like me, determined to ensure that the type of liberation work we do in the world, the type of healing work we do in the world, and the ways that we organize to make sure that those things include our young people and include our responsibility and our sense of accountability around changing intergenerational relationships, starting with ourselves and our knowledge of how learning works and what it is like to be in a more partner-centered, trustful relationship with young people. My name is Akilah S. Richards, and I'm coming to you from the U.S. South. I am on Muskogee Creek land, now named Atlanta, Georgia. Really grateful for this land holding me and my family, and just want to honor the Muskogee Creek people and honor this as their land that was taken from them. I also want to honor the energies of my ancestors from Africa, whose bodies, whose spirits, whose souls were and are part of this land here in the U.S. South as well. So this invitation is one to speak about a child-friendly home, some of the elements of it as I understand them. And I'm happy to do that because I remain deep in the mix of that in my own relationship with my children, who are 16 and 14 years old, Marley and Sage, and my partner, Chris. So one of the things that we keep front and center, that I keep front and center, and Chris, because it's less so about Marley and Sage and more so about us, is to think about power as something that is shared and not something that is owned. So, for example, though Marley and Sage don't generate any significant income, which means that we have the power over their finances and over where we live and all of these things that require financial resources, what we do is we look at power from the space of equity, not equality. Equality would mean that, okay, since everybody here is contributing financially or contributing in other ways, then all of the decisions about where we live and what we spend our money on, they're going to be made all together. That would be equal, right? So we're not talking about equality because that wouldn't fit, because Marley and Sage are not financially responsible for the household. Chris and I are. But what is equitable, what is a more reasonable approach to and distribution of power, is one where we say, okay, but in terms of equity, they do contribute to the household in terms of chores. Also, they are 16 and 14. They're not in their 40s. So it would not be equitable for us to lord over them the reality that we have money and they don't, and therefore we should own, elements of their time and what they do, and that their input wouldn't be relevant. So a lot of these things are about the approach that you take. So when Chris and I really reimagined power and equity and equality, we started to realize that even though our daughters could not participate in terms of an equal playing field, that there were ways that their equity would be named and utilized as relevant in terms of factoring it into the decisions that we make, and that their input is requested and considered even when they're not at an equal playing ground with us, right? So that's one way. Another way that we make a practice, I was going to say we make sure, but we can't make sure, we can only practice. Another way that we practice a home environment that allows for self-directedness to emerge and for a child to feel seen and heard and cared for is that we don't try to hide the need for and the right to have boundaries. That one's very tough for me, coming from a very conventional household that really a lot of the parenting was informed by the British colonial way that we were raised as Jamaicans under British rule. And even though when I was living in Jamaica as a child, we were not technically under British rule, that settler colonial mindset still informed educational practices and parenting practices, and it seeped in and toxified culture and made it so that a lot of our elders stopped viewing us as young people who had a closeness to spirit and source and all of the things that came with our culture, and instead were forced to view us as the most vulnerable citizens among them. And so we needed to be controlled in order to be kept safe. And that same mentality is one that is very much embedded in how we raise children and how we see children, whether we are parenting them or not, even as educators and as just community members. So we think of our children as vulnerable, which in many instances they are. And what happens, though, is that we take what I call a colonizer-minded approach, and instead of being in deeper community and partnership with our children so that they can own their time and space and so that they can develop the skills of discernment and have trustful adults with whom they can talk to about what they see and who they trust with their own wisdom, like instead of that, what we have is a lot of hiding, a lot of going behind the person in power and doing what we gonna do anyway, which is what happens when power is lorded over us instead of being something that is shared, instead of something that is being understood and defined collaboratively. When power isn't treated in that way, then what you have are tools of oppression, like power and control and coercion and not trusting and physical violence and manipulation and punishment and reward. All of these things that we have normalized in our relationships to children and childhood are really symptoms of when we were being controlled. And though many of us are not being controlled physically anymore as adults, we still are mentally. And so to nurture an environment that is child-friendly is in fact to recognize, to name, to face, to work through the ways that you yourself have been colonized and the ways that that colonized approach to living and to being and to fear informs how you are around children, how you view them, how you view their vulnerability as something to protect at all cost. And it does cost them. It also costs us, because when we are not in community with our children, with our young people, in our homes and beyond our homes, we duplicate old habits and patterns that we don't even recognize are harmful, or we have so much practice with them being harmful that we see them as harmful, but we don't know how to do better. In my experience as an unschooling mother, it is and has been and continues to be my relationships with Marley and Sage that help me to see the ways that colonization influence my home life and my parenting mindset and my relationships even beyond that. And it is what allows me to imagine beyond what I'm used to see the ways that Marley and Sage operate when I back up, and to invite those opportunities into my own relationships with myself and other people. They become my teachers, and I am sometimes their teachers as well. But in our home, which is one that I do think is child-friendly, because it's not about the child, it's about humans together. It's human-centered, which is inherently child-friendly. Because when you're considering a young person not as a blank slate, but as a human being with feelings and emotions and wisdom and capacity to evolve their thinking and to listen, when we humanize young people in those ways and stop seeing them as a blank slate to fill and protect only, then we learn so much about so much. We learn about ways to be together without needing to control an outcome. We learn how play becomes study and how play is a form of study and study is a form of play and how to honor that. We learn about our own schoolish lens and how we can start to back away from that to pay attention to our children in an environment where they are being trusted with their time and their energy and their wisdom. And what that evolves into, as I've seen it evolve into, so much study and brilliance among my children and among the other children with whom I get to be in community through my relationships with their parents who are unschooling and deschooling. So this is it, right? I don't have a checklist of 15 things that you can do for a child-friendly home. I do have a course about moving from schoolish to self-directed, and I talk about some of the beliefs and some of the barriers to a more self-directed space of being and allowing intergenerationally, right? So it is less about this list of things to do and not do, and more about approaching your child and the children in your life, whether they are yours or not, from a more humanized perspective. I often say that when it comes to this practice of raising free people, resistance is the roadmap. When one of my children push back, when they resist something that I'm doing, there's an opportunity for me to lay out this map and say, what's going on right now? And what is my role in their resistance? Is it because I'm triggered by something and I'm reacting to that? What is going on? Inviting inquiry and observation and stillness instead of defaulting to my reactions, right? To my vices as a parent. These are some of the ways that we can invite a home environment that is conducive to actual partnership, that is intergenerational, that is equitable, even though not always equal, and that is rooted in love and trust and a capacity to be and raise free people. I surely hope that that is helpful for you in your own practice. Thank you so much for your time and energy, and you'll find me over at raisingfreepeople.com to continue this conversation. Sending so much love to you and yours as you do this work. Thank you.
Wow, she's an incredible speaker. I highly recommend her book. So I will start by introducing everyone that's on the panel. I think everyone, I just can't see them all on my screen yet. I'll start with Richard Sharpe, wherever you are.
Hi, folks. How are you doing?
Thanks, Richard. Do you want to start by introducing yourself, Richard, and maybe a little bit of background, just a couple of minutes? If I know all the wonderful things about you, but I think you'll do a better job.
Yes, well, my name is Richard Sharpe. I'm with, I was working in community for the last 2 years, supporting something called the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent. I was one of the co-founders of the 613819 Black Hub. I was one of the co-founders of the Federal Black Employee Caucus, and have been doing a lot of work with the federal government around the funding for Black communities. While doing that, I was raising my children and having to engage with the school system, especially with my son. That pulled me out of retirement in 2017 to engage in some protection and support for him in the school system. There's been a lot of work since then to support and to engage the various school boards here in Ottawa, and also the Ministry of Education around data collection and around trying to make sure we know what's happening to our Black children in the schools. I'm a member of the of Richard's group, United for Children and Youth, and happy to be supporting that organization and the work around more equitable and supportive learning environments for our children. I think this is very critical for our people, both racialized, Black, Indigenous, and others within the society, that we have a better education system. I've currently just started a position over at the Department of Justice Canada, working on addressing some very intense issues around the justice system for our people, Black and Indigenous people, as well as working on addressing systemic racism within the organization. So if you won't see me very much out in the community these days, probably because I'm trying to learn a new job and I've had to step back a bit. But this is an important issue, and hoping to be part of the conversation on how to address issues of learning for our children in an unschooled, untraditional environment. So thanks.
Thanks, Richard. Modest, you're already a part of the conversation and a lot of the work, but yes, for today specifically. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Marley Richards. Marley is the daughter of Akilah Richards. Marley, welcome. So happy to have you here. I can see your beautiful smile. Share some love, some of what you're up to, and an introduction of yourself.
Hi, I'm Marley. I am Akilah Richards' daughter. I am currently working with her network, Raising Free People. I'm a youth rights advocate who is helping the National Youth Rights Association, NYRA, on their self-directed education outreach currently. I am also really just studying a lot of languages right now, and learning languages has been a really interesting way of figuring out how young people are taught to see themselves and the process of learning. So, I mean, I'm a language tutor and a youth rights advocate, if you want to put it on an occupation. So I'm really looking forward to having a little bit of a conversation surrounding my mom's video.
Amazing. And a little bit on her book, I hope, as well, because I love that book. It's amazing. Thank you, Marley. Thank you so much. Really happy to have you here. All right, Stephanie, do you want to introduce yourself? It's okay. These things happen. We're rolling with it. This is mindfulness. We're easing into the discomfort. This is what mindfulness is all about. Discomfort never killed us, right?
Absolutely.
I absolutely believe that just not being able to manage discomfort is white fragility. Like, can we sit with ourselves when we are uncomfortable?
I also just sent Oliver a private invitation to come all the way down to the basement to my office if the technology is not working upstairs where he is.
Yes, no worries. That's fine. That's totally fine.
So yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I'm also one of the directors for the Uniting for Children and Youth, which Richard has created as a meeting space for exactly the kind of conversations that have already been happening here today. My first foray into this world of education was as a teacher, and I turned around and left that fairly quickly, realizing that it wasn't feeling good. Similar to what Marsha was saying, it just didn't feel like it was where and how I wanted to be with kids. That led into a journey of homeschooling, unschooling, Oliver, who's now 18, and his sister Julia, who's 15. So through that whole process of connecting with amazing people and learning about this other world and other way of thinking about learning and education and living, I decided to grow that into a business. So I now work as a consultant and a coach for families who are trying to figure this out for themselves. So it's a really exciting thing to do. And then the other hat that I wear is as a children's choir director. And that's one of my favorite moments in the week, is getting to hang out and sing with a bunch of awesome kids.
That's amazing. fine. Sylvia, do you want to introduce yourself? Glad to have you here. Nice to see you. It's been almost a year since I've seen you in person before COVID, but nice to see you again virtually.
Well, it's wonderful to see you again too. And in fact, this whole thing is kind of a surprise because I didn't know I was on this panel. So that's great too. Yeah, I'm a retired educator coming from, been living on Algonquin territory here for the past 30 years. And I'm just really pleased and really happy that we're having these conversations and that people are being as honest and as passionate as they can be about how we're going to make education a lot more equitable, a lot more fun, and a lot more transformative starting now. So that we don't have conversations that we were having 40 years ago and 30 years ago, and reports being written and everything else staying the same. Stops now. And I'm really, really happy to be part of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love your passion. That's one thing that's always contagious, is listening to you talk. It's very passionate and very contagious. I just want to follow you to the ends of the earth. So thank you everyone for the introduction. I see Oliver. Okay. Oliver's with Stephanie. So Oliver, hi.
Hi. Oh,
thanks
okay.
Thanks for your flexibility.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, that was bizarre. My mic has never not worked during a Zoom call.
Of course it's going to when you're in like a big thing like this. Like it's really just an opportunity to,
Yeah, exactly.
invite stillness in, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm Oliver Przednowek. I'm her son. Yeah, so I don't have any like that much experience with. I'm not like a youth rights advocate. I don't know all that much about education, but what I do have is a lot of experience both as a homeschooler and going to school. So I hope to kind of bring that perspective as someone who just last year was in school and kind of talk about that. Just kind of talk about my experiences.
Awesome. We're happy to have you, and we're happy to celebrate your courage and your vulnerability today. So thank you so much, Oliver, for even just sharing with us some of those details. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
all right. You're welcome. So what do we do now? I'm just looking back here. So we've all watched the video. Some of us may have glanced the book, or Marley is probably very well versed in it because that's her and she lives it.
Pardon me? I have it with me somewhere.
Oh, I have like sticky notes. I was like, yes, fire, yes, fire. The Biggie quote that she uses, I was like, okay, all right, Akilah, I see you. The mad question asking, I was like, okay. So Marley, we'll kick it off with you. Let's talk a little bit about the video, but more on a personal level for you. What does that represent? And whatever you'd like to share, we're open.
Oh, such a broad topic.
Great. Maybe pick one area.
Where do I begin? Yes, I'm like trying to just narrow it down here. So in terms of a child-friendly home, I think I really try to focus when I'm talking to adults about how to be advocates for young people. I really do focus on the aspect of equity over equality, right? Because as she perfectly gave that example, like technically, why do we have a say in where we want to stay? Like they're paying all the bills and do. But in terms of equity, that simply doesn't foster the sort of trust environment we want to have. I was doing a previous workshop about something like this, and one of the things that came up was just thinking about the kind of process that you want to have when interacting with young people. Like, what do you want your practice to be? So I use the instance sometimes of my mom and I used to have a thing because an issue because I didn't make up my bed, but she wanted me to. And so we would go back and forth. I'm like, it's my bed. You're not even in it. I'm not in it half the time. There was all that back and forth. But the thing that really gave her pause, right, was thinking about what is the process that I want to have for this? If she is doing something that I don't like, do I want my process to be just do it anyway because I said so? or figuring out why I have an issue with it. Is there a compromise we can come to? Does there need to be a compromise, right? So, you know, as you said previously, mad question asking, just being able to do that Socratic method and just constantly be like, well, why this? Why that? Is that even their problem? That sort of pausing process is something that I really try to instill. No, it's something I really try to get people to think
Encourage.
about.
Yeah, encourage, empower. Totally.
Yes,
Totally.
encourage. Yes,
I
yes,
want to touch
because I feel that it's a very transformative way. Yeah.
I want to touch quickly to the Socratic questioning. So in psychology, there is therapy forms of like cognitive behavioral therapy encourages Socratic questioning. And when your mom's talking about unschooling, all I could think about is the work I do with my clients, either individual clients or counseling that I've done, because I've been in therapy for like 11 years, because it just supports my mental health to be able to have that space, right? And that Socratic questioning, that ability to be able to take pause through mindfulness practices specifically is what I do, but stillness in general, that mindful awareness, what's happening in me, what am I seeing? And then that questioning, right? And then that point that your mother makes just about moving from a more, the way I saw it or read it was moving from a more egocentric parenting style, which colonialism is very much the individualism, to, okay, yes, we need a healthy relationship with our egos. Absolutely. But the I, the me, the my is not always the center of everything. And I really appreciated that in how your mom was describing it. And I'm really happy that you also alluded to Socratic questioning, because those are tools that if you're practicing those things on your own, you're able to carry that into your parenting style as well. And that part of ourselves that we think is, I call it the dictator in my brain, we think is running the show, that will lead us to doing things like, well, no, because I said you have to make the bed and we can, okay, I hear it. Okay, I see the vision. Oh, okay. And the unschooling piece is we can accept that, but we can decide to do something differently. We can accept and learn about ourselves, learn about these thoughts, learn about these beliefs that we have deep, deep in our subconscious. And a lot of it is, there's a really good book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy. It's a really great read. And it talks about how the subservient in Black communities specifically, and that trickles down into intergenerationally to what Marley was just describing as well, in the unschooling and the things that we have internalized racism in our cognitions, in our beliefs, and how we show up to the world. So thank you, Marley, for that. I wanted to highlight that, bring that all together there. I'm going to pass it off to Oliver. What did you think of the video? What were some of your takeaways?
So, So, yeah, I guess the most interesting kind of thing I found with the video is when Akilah was talking about how power works, and how like kind of in parenting and as well as in schools, power tends to be conventionally ruled over youth instead of being shared. So that's definitely something that I've sort of seen go both ways. I've seen power being ruled over youth. I've also seen it seen situations in which it's shared. So for example, I mean in my home, I've been pretty fortunate where power is shared, in the whole kind of equity way that Akilah was talking about. When I was in homeschooling courses, when I was doing classes with other homeschoolers, power was really, the teacher was there to provide knowledge and to facilitate our learning, but it was very much the students that sort of chose where they wanted the class to go. Whereas then when I went to school, I did school both in grade 7 and grade 12. Grade 12, I went to more conventional school. It was like a Ottawa public school. So when I was there, it really, like the classes were very much a curriculum that's set up by some person or some board of people, and that's taught, and students have to like they have to like go with that, right? They have to take the test and all that. And that sort of creates, because the power is ruled down on students, that's very much, it creates a sort of sense of rebellion in a way, because no one likes to do something that they're forced to do. It's not something that we enjoy doing generally. So stuff like people cheating on tests, all of that doesn't, it all becomes, we're learning for a test to get a good mark so we can get into university. Because apparently that's what dictates how well our lives will go. So yeah, that was really my experience in school. There are exceptions. There are some teachers who kind of understand how it doesn't always make sense, but generally that was my experience. Whereas yeah, in the homeschooling classes, I was able to, or it was very much more kind of student driven. So that was just interesting seeing that, like seeing how Akilah was talking about that, and also like with parenting.
Yeah. So from what I hear in what you're saying as well is you're talking about like authoritative, also like the idea that teachers are or parents are authoritative figures, and that power dynamic being in that kind of context as well. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the rebellion, I want to tie it back to Marley's point about resistance. So do you feel like the rebellion can, because I experienced that too,
Yeah.
labeled as a rebel, disruptive, or a drama queen or problematic. So I can really relate to that piece. So would you say the rebellion is that resistance?
Yeah, it's just from, like, again, from my experience, it's when there are like the teacher has power. They're the ones who decide what mark a student will get, and the students don't like it when they're being told to learn what some other person wants them to learn. Whereas then, if that power isn't sort of isn't top down, it's much more, we're much more interested in learning then.
Mm-hmm. And something else you're also alluding to that comes up for me, my daughter's only 4, but I'm already seeing it, is the importance of validating your experiences and your feelings around things in terms of the relation to your self-trust. And so your ability, Oliver, to trust yourself, do you feel like that is supported more when there is more of an equity?
Yeah. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Again, like when you're in school, you aren't trusted, and that's kind of, that doesn't lend itself well to you trusting yourself. Whereas again, when I'm homeschooling, when I choose to self-direct my education, it's, I have to trust myself that I know what I'm doing. I know that I want to learn this, and I've kind of decided, like, this is what I want to learn, and this makes sense for me to learn. And then trusting myself to, like, really go with that, and pursue that.
Yeah, I think that self-trust is it's a life skill that is lacking in the way the system is set up now, because when as a parent you can validate that for your child and empower their own self-trust,
Yeah.
the confidence, the self-esteem, right? The ability to also be their authentic selves. So like, this is how I'm feeling, this is how I'm expressing it, this is how I want to, right? And that freedom versus trying to fit into, okay, well, when you're sad, it's supposed to look like this. And when you're this, it's supposed to look like this. And this is the path. And this is the boxes you need to tick. You can move out of like a comfort zone that can be restrictive and lean into fear with courage. And then past that, start to thrive. So you're moving past that survival mode. And that's where real belonging comes in. Despite all of our, or not a despite, because it's not a despite thing, but and with all of our differences, that we're able to really belong still. So thank you so much for that, Oliver. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And
Marley,
if I may, I think, yeah, I was saying, I think all of these processes to like deter your ability to trust yourself and these sorts of things, they all lend themselves very well to other kinds of prejudice. I think one of the easiest ways to explain the damage that school does, and my mom calls it school wounds, right? What the easiest way to explain those school wounds to people who are apprehensive is to think about it through the context of any other thing. Like, I'm a Black girl, right? So if you think about, like as like the dynamic of power, right? You think about how you want to wield that, like, oh, they're rebelling because they're rebellious. Like, no, they're rebelling because they have unmet needs, essentially. And you're deterring the ability to trust themselves because it's essential to keeping your power. If they have a reason to believe in themselves, or to at least feel like they know what they're talking about, know their feelings enough to go with it, then you lose a lot of that power. So I think tying the way we think of education and what we're putting young people into to other prejudices that we are more in tune with, that we want to get rid of, I think that's a really easy way to think of it too. Like, oh, sometimes it's simplifying it, but like, let's think of this between like a child and adult as a Black person and a white person. Like, how does that play out? Does that feel weird? And a lot of times the answer is yes.
Thank you.
So I think reframing is super helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Thank you so much, Marley. That actually leads well into the next point about, a child-friendly home around our children's sovereign beings. What does sovereign mean? What does sovereignty mean? Richard, Sharpe, or Sylvia, whoever wants to jump in, or Stephanie, whoever wants to jump in on that one around sovereignty and our children being sovereign beings, self-governing beings, moving from self-trust into that nice segueing well into that.
Oh, it looks like we're all ready to jump in.
Oh, go ahead, Stephanie. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sure. So I think the idea of a sovereign being is key. It comes back to what Oliver was talking about in terms of the trust and in terms of the ability to self-direct. After listening to Akilah's talk, I was really reflecting on when we start handing that sovereignty over to our children. Because as somebody said earlier, when a baby is born, they're completely dependent on us. If we leave them out, it's not going to work out so well. So parenting is like this process of gradually identifying moments that you're able to start letting go and allowing your child to move into that place that is theirs, that they belong to themselves. And one of the things that I used to think about that is the idea of, if you think of like a soccer field where you've got kind of the two end zones, and then you've got in the middle, that's where the game is played. And there's like the parent in one end zone, the child in another end zone. And as parents, when our children are little babies, we are the ones running around that field. We're making all the decisions. So the more we can step back into closer to our zone, the more our kids can step into the game and to start taking that responsibility for themselves. It's a really hard process as a parent to do that. And that's where that idea of reflection comes in. Akilah said towards the end of her talk, the idea of those moments of resistance being like a map. And that really resonated for me, because when there's a pushback, it's an invitation. And as a parent, we can either respond with like, no, this is the way it is. Or we can take a step back and say, I'll get back to you on that, and think about, well, what is going on? Is this a moment that I get to hand something over to my child? And, it being in the position that we're in right now, if Oliver is 18 years old and legally an adult, and, he's playing his own game now, there is a tremendous beauty to being kind of at this end of that journey. Because you get to just be with that person, you get to enjoy them and value them, and you don't have to be in that place of like, oh, like, did I make the right decision for them? And I think the idea of a child-friendly house is allowing them to make as many of their own decisions as they can as early as possible, while still recognizing that we need to hold their well-being as long as they need it held for them. We hold them in our arms when they're born, and we hold them emotionally. for longer than that. And that's our job. And it's a beautiful job. And every little bit of it that we pass back to them, we get to just like enjoy them as full human beings that we walk with instead of that we carry.
I love that. What came up for me too, as you were saying that, is, as you said, specifically, it's hard. And I can totally resonate with that. Just because I'm a mindfulness coach doesn't mean I'm always like pieces and roses and here I come with patchouli and like, I'm ready, sis. Like sometimes there's times when I yell at my daughter or I do things and I feel really bad about it after. And there's no manual when you're parenting. So all the parents out there that are hearing all this, I'm righteous like anybody else in my, okay, well, here I am in a panel giving all these righteous ideas, right? But I am struggling like any other parent to grasp this. And my daughter is in the weeds, she's 4. So I'm in the very beginning stages of this. And so what came up for me in this as well is the importance of compassion. And compassion to me, if I could put it in a sentence, is I'm doing the best that I can, or they're doing the best that they can, or I was doing the best that I could at that time. And it's important as parents that when we practice that self-compassion, recognizing that that also supports our children to practice compassion as well. And I noticed that even with my daughter, there were like little things I'd be like, oh, you spilled the water. And I'd have this ridiculous like autopilot reaction. And then feel bad about it after, because that's not authentically how I wanted to show up. That was just very reactive. And recognizing that the compassion, and sitting with her and showing her what that looks like. I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to, but seeing also her kind of being like, oh, I'm sorry, Mom, it was just an accident, starting to have those reactions at such a young age. I was like, okay, I need to work on this. Here's the resistance, here's my opportunity, I'm seeing this, right? And knowing that children, we do not give them enough credit. My daughter is far more emotionally intelligent, far freer than I am. She feels something, she lets it out, and she moves on with her day. She feels something, she lets it out. They're better with the flow. They're better with the flow that we, in our rigidity, our mental rigidity, struggle with. And so we need to trust that and learn from that as well. So I wanted to move into Richard and Sylvia, if you have any comments just about that piece of sovereignty and anything additional to what I was saying.
Yeah, I think that's Stephanie and the young people really captured the whole idea of sovereignty. I call it agency personally, in terms of giving the young people an opportunity, allowing them to find their way when they're small and they're catching hell at school. And when Mandela was having trouble at school, I go in there and kick in the door and rattle the cage and tell them to stop. That was, I felt, was my role as the protective parent. But as they got older and they're like, still having problems at school, with Mandela, I remember him saying, Dad, I don't need you to come to the school. I know what the drill is. I need to figure it out myself. And so what these young people end up teaching us as parents, and what we should be able to receive in terms of learning, is what our place really is, and that our place really should be to be enablers to help them find their way. And so over and over, these young people that I have in my home, my son, he's off in Oklahoma running from the coronavirus and his little soccer ball. But what I continually, I'm surprised at how much I learn from my children, and then in terms of giving them that space, allowing them to live their lives and make mistakes. I think the most difficult thing for me, as a really controlling kind of guy, I like to control my environment. So I like to control, I control deputy ministers and politicians wherever I get the chance to make change. I have no hope with being able to control and manage my children. They are the most difficult and most challenging experience that I've had. I have much easier time dealing with these so-called big important people than I do listening and being humbled by these children who are really our people. So giving them sovereignty or agency allows them to become people in a way that I think is much more authentic and valuable for them and their futures than trying to coddle them and protect them every step of the way. I think as parents who want to, I think Stephanie was saying, you want to, protect them from getting run over on the football field. But sometimes they need to get trampled a little bit, and they learn from that as long as they don't get themselves killed. but they learn from that, and then they come back and they do it better, or they do it differently. So, you know, it helps them to find their way. So all this stuff about education is really important, because they're not able to do that within the school system. My daughters are struggling within the school system because of its rigidity and rules, and compounded by COVID. So we need to do a lot of unpacking and trying to help repair sometimes damage that is done by the school system, because they choose to be in the school system. We're not putting them there.
Can I jump in for a second? So Richard, you mentioned the idea of how sometimes it feels like it's harder to interact with or figure out our own kids than it is the people in, you know, positions of authority, you know, importance and so on. I think we kind of accidentally fell into a routine, which in retrospect really helped. When the kids were both homeschooling, at the beginning of every year and at the end of every year, we would sit down and at the beginning kind of make plans for the year. And it very much looked like a self-directed opportunity. So it was like, well, what are you into? What do you want to learn about this year? You know, who are the people that you saw regularly last year that you'd like to see regularly again? So these conversations resulted in, you know, classes being signed up for forest schools or whatever it was. It kind of set the tone for our routine for that year or those following months. Likewise, at the end of the year, we reflected on that. So because we set that up thinking in terms of schoolishness, like, oh, it's the beginning of the year, we better set up the school year. But actually what it also did was it allowed conversations around who are you and what's important for you right now. So going back to what Richard said, I think when we're interacting with people in our work world, we have those opportunities. Like, we have a meeting, and we know that in a meeting we're supposed to like discuss stuff, but we don't typically set up those opportunities with our kids, or it's less obvious. And as I said, in retrospect, those like school planning the year meetings were far more than that, and I think gave a tremendous amount of opportunity for both the kids to take on themselves, to recognize that, you know, in Oliver's case, mountain biking was just as important to make a part of his week as math.
Thank you, Stephanie. Before Sylvia, I hand it over to you for some words, whatever you want to share, or we're open. Just to let everyone know, we're at the 5 o'clock mark, so we're at our mark, but we are okay to go a little bit over. If you need to leave, we completely understand. I know Richard is recording this, so you will be able to access this again later. So we completely understand if you have to leave, but if you can stay, we will likely stay just a little bit longer, and then hopefully we can open it up for some questions at the end. So Sylvia, I hand it over to you.
You know what, I'm just gonna leave my little contribution here to say thank you so much to Oliver and Marley. Just so articulate and courageous. I must say, as a grandmother now, it's a little different for me than it was with my own kids. But what I'm really seeing is that how my privilege, my being white, has been and really has been a challenge to good communication with my students. And it wasn't until I recognized that whiteness and all the privileges that come with that. And decolonization is as important for white people as it is for everybody else. And I just have to really congratulate those who have the self-identity, who have the confidence, and something that we should be nurturing in our schools, but we're not, because 95%, at least around here, the teachers are white. And I'm going to leave it on that note, because I know that we're out of time, but I just want to say, please keep up that, if you can, that courageous spirit. And the parents who don't have to worry, as a white parent, when my kids leave in the morning, I'm pretty confident they're going to come home at night, but not a lot of other people have that. And once school we get the attitude that what happens outside is just as much our responsibility, and we have to actually do something about that. And that's why for me, justice is such a pivotal pillar of it has to become a pivotal pillar of the education system. And I'm going to leave it at that. Just thank you to everybody, and I'm looking forward to touching base with you all again tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. So I will, if anyone, any of our panelists would like to share anything, Marley, Richard, Stephanie, or Oliver, feel free. Otherwise, I can open it up for some questions. I mean, I have lots that I could go into with all of this, with each and every one of you around what we've been talking about. And there's a lot of great stuff in the chat. So if you take a look at that, which there was just one that I would love to read if nobody has anything else to add just yet, but Marley had shared something. I don't see Ted's question. I'm just trying to find what Ted had asked you, Marley.
I have it if need be.
Okay, can you share that with me and then just give your points on that? I think that's with the group. I think that's a really important dialogue that you're having in the chat, because this is recorded and may not be seen after the chat.
Yes, let me share it with you. I've never done this before, so we're gonna see. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Cool. So that I don't know if I should summarize or just let people read.
Yeah, well, what was the specific question that, okay, so Ted asked, there could be a whole conference on this subject, or maybe not. It's just maybe very deep because of many layers of what Akilah just said. I expect lots of blowback of what I'm about to say, or at least lots of thoughts then I think that don't wish to verbalize. Were Akilah a white woman? Were Akilah a white woman from an upper class family, the reaction might be very different, but she's not. And through her filter, we hear the beauty of themes that were developed by Martin Luther King. I'm assuming Martin Luther King Jr. They resonate with me, and I'm a white guy of 75 who went to jail to fight for ethics studies. But what Akilah didn't emphasize was her financial status, or at least an entitled status. What I'm saying is that she's had the benefit of wise guidance. All this said, the problem that I see is that too many parents can't create a child-friendly home because they lack the education, the financial status, or socioeconomic status, the benefits of capitalism. They are the victims of it until fairness spreads across the land with at least a $15 minimum wage, with an understanding of the necessity. Do you want to give your response back?
Yes. So I responded, Ted, you made an excellent point of self-directed education being such a resource and time-heavy process. The way to navigate this for those who don't have the privileges my family does is to have honest communication. As the moderator mentioned, saying, I'm doing the best I can is a basic form of communication, often not afforded to young people because they are to be seen and not heard. I do not have the privilege of being a man, for example. So when I want to wear certain things but can't because of how our society is set up, the way my parents practice making our home child-friendly is to explain their choice, to say, no, you can't wear that outside. Does that make sense?
Awesome, thank you so much. If you'd like to elaborate, Marley, you can. If not, we can leave it there and open it up. It's completely up to you.
Yes, so I can do it really quickly because I agree that that could be a whole discussion. My family is in a really interesting and definitely privileged position because, you know, we are a Black family in the deep South of America. We are not middle class, but we have a lot of resources. So I think like figuring out how we can implement self-directed education for varying levels of privilege is a really huge and lovely conversation. And I think one of the things that is the simplest way to get started is to have that honest conversation. You know, I have a lot of friends, their family are in different positions than mine, but they make an effort to communicate honestly with their parents. So if they are, you know, if there it could be anything, right? For like, I just use the example of being a girl because it's what's familiar to me. But for those sorts of things, explaining, well, we're making a choice as the people that are in charge of protecting you, you know, as parents, but we can explain this further so that it doesn't stop at because I said so. Because I think that's the default for a lot of people, which I understand, you know, that like you may not have the time or space for that sort of thing. But I think it's about, again, like about the kind of process that you want to have, like the kind of like the kind of process that you want to go through when having a conversation or a conflict. Yeah.
I think we can also say, I can't, like another phrase that I think we've started to use more is, I can't talk about it right now, but we can talk about it later. So right now it has to be this because whatever, there's some like logistical thing, but we can talk about it later. So that idea, Marley, of opening up the conversation but at the same time, making life work. You know, we can't always stop everything and have a conversation. I'm thinking of trying to get a 2-year-old into a car seat, right? Like when that 2-year-old is like just stiff and they will not let you fasten it. Sometimes you just,
Yeah.
So, and the other thing I wanted to add to what you said about communication is there's also community. I think that's a huge piece of having, you know, be they self-directed families or whatever it is, when we can be a family in community, that offers so many opportunities.
Yeah, us having a large community that then has resources we can use even if we can't get to them ourselves, that is part of our privilege of being of having, you know, a lot of people that we're able to trade with all the time. So it's not like I would never ascribe one way of doing this sort of thing, but I think what makes self-directed education the way to go in terms of youth rights is the ability to see them as a person, right? To see young people as a person. So if you are having an issue or you have something that you really need to do and you can't like explain right now with a person, what do you do, right? Do you just kind of like push them and be like, because I said so? Like all of those conversations in your head, right? All of those thoughts are things that need to be had because they're not things that immediately jump to mind when we think about interacting with young people. So yeah, I mean, you know, it'll take me a minute to recognize like how deep my privilege goes in terms of being able to do this sort of self-directed thing, but it is 100% something that people in every situation can practice, just to different degrees.
Yes, thank you so much, Marley. What comes to me too, in just reading some of the comments as well around this, goes back to the righteousness. We're all righteous in what we think. Like self-righteousness is just a part of who we are, right? And so what works, it is, right? So Ted, you're self-righteous in your, you know, views on this. I'm self-righteous in my views on this. Sylvia, like we all have righteousness in us. And the sooner we can accept that and not villainize it, the better we will be to being open to variances and differences. And guess what? We're a part of impermanence, change. We're a part of nature. That's a beautiful connection and community to be a part of. You look outside, you see the weather changing, you see change every day. And that's the impermanence and the beauty of watching our children and the flow that they have to this impermanence. Whereas we get into a state where our ego is so developed, it attaches itself to identities, to beliefs, to very linear, rigid things. And so that's where mindfulness, I find, really comes in. And to your point about it being a luxury, Ted, what comes to me is colonialized wellness and the idea that mental health and wellness support, or mental health, being mentally healthy and mentally your well-being and your wellness are a luxury item in general, that being able to access things like mindfulness means you have to have special Lululemon pants and so on, or fancy cushions. And that is not, that shouldn't be a luxury. That's just my cognitive belief, right? And that's why I do what I do, because we are impermanent beings in impermanence, in change all the time. And as uncomfortable as that is, it won't kill us. And that access shouldn't be a luxury. So this is what I'm hearing from everybody, you know, speaking today as well, is like, let's normalize variances and differences and hold space for that, and also just recognize our human condition of being righteous and wanting things to be one way and wanting things to be like, if it's A, then it's B, then B goes to C and so on. And that's just not the way that life works. And that's where that resistance comes in too, right? We have our own individual resistance, and we see that as an opportunity as well to go inward and say, whew, okay, yeah, because I wanted my daughter to do this, or because I wanted life to look like this. Oh yeah, that's why I'm reacting deep down in my subconscious. This is coming. And that work is, nobody's going to do that for you. Again, back to Marcus Garvey's quote. If you don't know who Marcus Garvey is, highly recommend looking him up. Bob Marley quoted him in his song, "Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Nobody is going to free us but ourselves from our own minds. We have to go into it. We got to pop the hood in our car and look at the smoke coming out of our engine. Nobody else can do it for us." So, you know, that compassion piece is important too, because it can be uncomfortable. It can be ugly in there. We have some thoughts and some things that we just, it's not pretty all the time, but that's a part of who we are. That's the organ just doing its thing. And the quicker we can realize it's not all of our being, and we can learn that from our children as well, the more free we will be. So I will just end it with that and just allow anybody to ask any questions, or if anybody else wants to share anything, Richard or Stephanie, you're more than welcome. But that's it for me.
I'll just say very, very briefly, like the Ted's question was really good. Marley's response was brilliant, as has been the input from Oliver, as well as the young people sort of leading part of this discussion. This whole issue of the privilege, right? So some of us do have the capacity to be able to keep our kids from home if our kids want to go home, or if our kids want to go to school. But then a lot of our people, especially Black and racialized people in our society in the United States, a lot of people feel that they have to send their kids to school so they can go to work, right? They can't work from home with their kids around. So the whole option of being able to unschool, homeschool, provide self-directed learning environment is to some extent something that is sort of a commodity. It is. You have to have the wherewithal. My partner could stay home and didn't have to work in order for us to still put food on the table and so on, and pay our mortgage and all that. So, you know, I like the way sort of Marley has framed it in terms of what we can do in ourselves, in our own lives, to get ourselves at least in the headspace of creating an environment where our learning and our engagements with our young people, with the young people that are becoming adults in our space and in our care, get what they need in terms of the space and the support to self-actualize. And be who they are intended to be. I remember reading the story a long time ago. I think it was called A Spell for Chameleon. I can't remember who it was. It was a science fiction novel where people were, everybody has a special talent, a special gift to do something. So we try to impart that on our kids. Mandela wants to be a soccer star. Okay, we give him lots of soccer and he's happy. You know, my one daughter wants to be an actor. You know, to send her to acting school or whatever when she was, when she was homeschooling, decided to go to a high school that specializes that. So she has purpose. The daughter wants to be an artist, right? So we give her lots of art, and, you know, so that they can find that happiness, get confidence in what they do, because this place breaks down the confidence in our children, especially our Black and racialized children. It breaks down the confidence in our children. So giving people their opportunity to establish their special gift, their special talent, and their purpose before either going into that environment or even while they're in that environment, I think is really key. Because unfortunately, schools are designed to sap all of that out of you. And we're seeing it now, even though we've thought we fortified our children, we still realize that we have to do more to give them that space that they need. And lastly, I know that one of the objectives of Richard Fransham's work and the team with United for Children and Youth is really around infiltrating the school system with some of these concepts around self-directed learning, given the fact that so many of our children, our people, are married to institutional schooling. So again, some of the Akilah's book is quite lovely. Is amazing. I didn't have time to read it, but my partner was reading it to me, and excerpts, and we very much saw ourselves and our Caribbeanness in all of the analysis. But that book is a good, and it's small, it's short, is a good tutorial for certainly for Black and racialized people, but for other people as well. I think we can imbibe some of this stuff and translate it into the existing school systems to make them better, to make them work for our children, and therefore I think help support them to be better human beings.
And I'll let people know that tomorrow the room will be open at 8:30 with the first presentation at 9. And I know for one, I'm going to go to bed tonight dreaming about some of these visions. And Richard Sharpe, I believe that schools can be places of self-directed learning. I really believe that. We have a lot of work to do, but that's one of the hopes that I hold. But thank you, everyone. I'm not sure, Richard, Richard French, if there's anything else we need to do. We'll just invite people back at 8:30 tomorrow with your coffee.